Morning, folks, and welcome to today's episode. But before we get into it, we have a big announcement. Starting in April, we'll be releasing an episode every week on a Wednesday. Now, these weekly episodes are going to be a bit shorter and it's just going to be me. But don't worry, the co hosted deep dives with me and Keith, released on the first of every month, are going to continue. But they will be for subscribers only. Not only will subscribers get the monthly co-hosted deep dives with me and Keith, we're also going to be putting a lot of bonus episodes behind the paywall for subscribers, starting with a fantastic three-parter on Disney, where we covered the Walt Disney era, the Michael Eisner era, and the Bob Iger era. It's a fantastic three-parter, and we're going to be adding more bonus episodes continually for subscribers only. To become a subscriber, it costs only $1.99 per month. And you can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/great business stories. Now, getting back to today's episode titled Barry Diller From Hollywood to Tech, the Master of Reinvention. You'll find out pretty quickly that both myself and Keith are big fans of Diller. He's the guy who brought us Roots, and in so doing, he pioneered the TV miniseries. He greenlighted some of the best and most iconic TV comedies, from Cheers to Taxi and all the way to The Simpsons, and not to mention some of the best and biggest movies of the 1980s. He also got involved in some of the biggest, most high profile, and dramatic media battles of the 80s and 90s. And then he pivoted. And he pivoted many times throughout his career. That's what I love about him, eventually becoming the main driver behind online dating. He got in early with Match.com, and later his company bought Plenty of Fish, Tinder, and they practically owned the dating sector. And through it all, Diller was this calm, very classy guy. It makes for a fascinating story. Enjoy.
Cayman, how are you?
Good, good, good.
Good.
Really looking forward to getting into this story because we've mentioned this guy, I'm pretty sure, a few times. I think he came
Yeah.
up in the Redstone episode. It's about Barry Diller.
Yes, and then tangentially, of course, we would have shared books down through the years, and he was almost, I would say, a side character in some of the Disney sort of Eisner stories. So your story, what kind of drew you to Barry Diller, and why did you want to do an episode on him? What was your thinking here?
Well, I mean, what doesn't draw you to Barry Diller? I think that's
Yeah.
the question because he's always there. I remember growing up when I started getting interested in business stories, like in my early 20s, and this would have been maybe 91, 92, and Barry Diller was always a very prominent guy in the media. And then you read back through the stories about, which we'll get into here, about these huge deals, because back then, the media back then was, I suppose, on a par with social media and the big businesses now. So you had like guys like Barry Diller, Rupert Murdoch, John Malone. These were the equivalent of the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs
Yes.
of the current day, and they were involved in these huge titanic battles for mergers and for buying media companies. And Diller was involved in some of the biggest ones. And I always knew we're definitely going to do a story on him. It was
Yeah.
just a question of, okay, when will we do it? So there was loads of reasons to draw me to Barry Diller. I just think he's a fascinating, enigmatic, because he's not very public. Even though I've listened to loads of interviews with him on podcasts, he kind of stays out of the headlines an awful lot, flies very much below the radar. But I'm sure in the 80s
Yes.
and 90s he was probably very much on the radar.
Yeah, I can remember him being on TV all right, and he physically quite an intimidating looking sort of character,
Yeah.
and quite outspoken. But I suppose for me, he wouldn't have been. I think you're right there. He mightn't have been as prominent or made as much of his success in terms of sort of appearances and notoriety. Really, he was quite private.
Yeah.
But maybe do you want to talk about sort of his early life and his origins and
Yeah. And his early life, because I didn't know anything about him other than the big
yeah.
stories. That's why I was really interested in getting to do this story, because just to dig a bit into his background. So He was born in 1942 in San Francisco, and he was raised in Beverly Hills. His father was a wealthy real estate guy, and he was obviously very prominent because he actually named some of the streets
Yes.
in Beverly Hills, I think it was, after his son. There's Barryvale and Barrydale, so they're obviously pretty well to do. And I love this quote from him about his school going days. He said, "I never went to school on Mondays or Fridays, and rarely on Wednesdays." So he wasn't
Right.
the most academic, but he was a voracious reader, apparently. He said he read tremendously, and that's how he educated himself. And
So quite a confident character then, obviously, even at that age. You've streets named after you and you go to school 2 days a week.
I can imagine he was very, very confident. And he always said he wanted to get into entertainment and never really wanted to get into academia or into college. He went to college but dropped out very early. And then through a family connection, he got into the entertainment business by getting a job in the mailroom of the legendary William Morris agency. And
So
there
a
was this-
talent agency.
a talent agency. That's where all the agents used to be, and they were the only real agency back then. I mean, since then now there's been loads of agencies that have cropped up, but most of them started in the William Morris agency. And I listened to a podcast interview with him and Reid Hoffman, and he was talking about his days there, and he spent 3 years there, and he said they had this huge archive in their building, and it was basically a history of all of Hollywood. And he said he just spent all his time in the archive, just reading and absorbing as much as he could about the business. And he said that was his learning ground, because he said after 3 years in William Morris, he realised, I don't want to be an agent. That's not for me. He wanted to get into TV, and this is another quote from him. He said, "I've always believed whatever you're interested in, get on the widest road, not the narrowest road. And television was certainly a pretty wide road." So television was where he wanted to go. And he had a lucky break, he was saying, this again in the interview with Reid Hoffman, because he got a job with Elton Rule, who at that time was head of ABC's West Coast operations. But as soon as he got the job with Rule was promoted to ABC Network president. And so as his assistant, Diller was also given far more serious role. And straight away he was given responsibilities such as negotiating broadcast rights and feature films. And he obviously must have been pretty good at his job, because by the age of 23, he was promoted to Vice President of Development at ABC.
That's astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, but you can see, I mean, his progress through the ranks, and we'd be talking like how he progressed through various studios and all that. He just must have been very, very sharp, very smart, and very noticeably so. Obviously, he was no shrinking violet,
Yeah, but he probably... This is a strange thing to say, but he probably didn't look like a 23-year-old. If you look at the interviews, he was probably an old 23-year-old.
Yeah, that's true, because for viewers who don't know Barry Diller, every picture I've ever seen of him, he's bald. So he seemed to have been bald from a very young age, and he seemed to have a very serious face from a very young age. He doesn't look boyish, even in his younger years. And I've got photos, when I was doing the research, there was photos of him from Studio 54, the Mad Studio.
Yeah.
And he's even in Studio 54, where you've got people dressed up in all kinds of crazy stuff. He's always got a tux on him. So, but in fairness, he looks very cool in his tux, but always very well dressed. Always seemed like the adult in the room, that kind of way.
Yeah, so he probably was confident enough in his own skin, and then probably physically didn't look like a 23-year-old. That's really interesting.
No, and as I said, even in the tux, he'd have the buttons open. It was very casual. He still looked pretty cool in his tux, even though there was nobody else in Studio 54 wearing a tux.
Probably not much clothes at all.
Exactly. So, yeah, very cool, confident kind of guy. And within ABC then, he rose through the ranks rapidly, because for all his strategic nous, creatively he was very, very good. He came up with this concept of the ABC Movie of the Week.
Yeah,
so before this, there wasn't any Movie of the Week on networks. And this was a 90-minute made-for-TV movie, and it redefined the network's programming. It was a huge hit. But Diller has cemented his reputation not for only coming up with that concept, but also for how he handled the negotiations of that concept, because ABC were in discussions with Universal on this, and Universal wanted exclusivity to do all the movies of the week. But Diller refused to relinquish control, and so Universal walked. But what it led to then was they had multiple partnerships with loads of different studios, and it allowed Diller to get more flexibility and
Right.
better deals. So Leonard Goldberg, who was head of programming at that time, said of him, as a result of those negotiations, he said he was a rough, tough kid who wasn't afraid and who had class and style. So, and that's one of the things that I love about Diller, and it comes out throughout all, not just what people say about him, but through his actions. He has a lot of class. You know, he's a very pragmatic, and he doesn't take things personally. I really like that, because there's been a lot of times in his life where deals have gone bad, and he kind of takes it on the chin and just moves on. So I think he's a lot of style.
So yeah, so tough, but not sort of a petulant bully.
No, oh no, not at all, not at all. I mean, and this is one of the things that shines through is how he treats his subordinates, especially he brings on younger people, and we'll talk about that. And everybody he's brought on talks about him with a huge amount of respect and loyalty. They really like him. Well, maybe Michael Eisner didn't show loyalty, as we'll talk about later on. But anyway, at ABC as well, not only did he come up with the movie of the week, he also came up with this new concept, which younger listeners will be a bit confused by. It was called, at the time, the novel for television. Essentially,
Yes.
it was the TV miniseries. There was no such thing as a TV miniseries at this stage. In other words, say an 8-part TV series that had a start and an end, you know, it finished after 8 or 9 weeks. He developed that concept. He started it with QB7. Then there was Rich Man, Poor Man. But then it really took off when he developed Roots in 1977. And Roots was this 8-part
Yeah.
series about slavery. It was viewed, Keith, by 85% of American households.
Wow.
And it became, the finale was the 3rd most watched TV episode in TV history. Can you guess what the 2 most watched episodes in TV history are?
Friends, maybe?
No.
Oh, God. Of a miniseries or a series?
Just as of a TV series overall.
a finale.
Yeah.
Cheers? I don't
No.
know.
No, and then not the most watched TV finale, the most watched episode ever. So the 2 most watched
Ooh.
episodes on TV ever. One I knew because it's from the Guinness Book of Records was MASH's finale. That's number 1.
Oh, wow, yeah, of course.
And number 2 was the Dallas episode, Who Done It?
Oh,
So the episode after JR got shot, and remember there would have been a break for the summer,
Oh,
and then the
yeah,
episode
yeah.
of Who Shot JR. So Roots came in number 3rd. But
wow.
so this was
And
huge.
these are, sorry, just for the younger
Yeah.
folks, these are what people would have called water cooler TV shows. You know,
Exactly.
these
Oh, they
water
were
cooler
huge.
moments. So just for everybody's sort of benefit of the younger generation, there's no on demand or streaming. Everybody's watching the same thing
Yeah.
at the same time. And this idea of the water cooler moment is, on the next day, people will be standing around the office water cooler discussing what happened
Yeah.
in the episode.
Yeah.
So it was a real social sort of event where everybody got together and talked about it,
Yeah.
which just doesn't happen anymore.
Doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Not with social media. But Roots, I remember, Keith. Now, it came out in America, they said, in 1977. It must have been brought over to Ireland, I'd say, about
Yeah, yeah.
6 or 7 years later, because I remember when it came out.
So do I, yeah.
And it was huge. It was
was
a
huge.
huge thing.
Yeah.
So-
it was brilliant, actually.
It was brilliant. It was really good. So that was his career at ABC. And of course, he gained a really strong reputation. And so at the age of 32, Charles Bluedorn, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was head of Paramount's parent company, Gulf and Western. And the studio Paramount was really struggling at that time, despite the prior success of The Godfather. And he handpicked Diller at the age of just 32 to become the CEO and chairman of Paramount Studios. And the first thing Diller did was built a team of young executives around him, and these were nicknamed the Killer Diller team. Okay, and they consisted of some like people who would go on to really shape Hollywood for decades to come. There was Michael Eisner, who had worked with Diller at ABC. He was hired as president, and he later went on to transform Disney, and we're going to be doing an episode on Eisner. Eisner or under Eisner then, there was Jeffrey Katzenberg, and of course he left Paramount to work with Eisner. Dawn Steele was also one of the killer Dillers. She made history by later becoming the first female to head a studio when she took over Columbia Pictures. Another of his proteges, Don Simpson, who joined up with Jerry Bruckheimer to do Flashdance, Beverly Hills, and Top Gun. I think that I remember reading books on Hollywood at that time. I think Don Simpson, he had a bit of a big coke habit, and there's some wild stories about him. And I think he died eventually. He died quite young, like in his 40s or something. But he's some character as well.
I wonder, did he feature in that Easy Rider, Raging Bulls?
I think he might have.
Yeah.
I think that's where I might have come across him first of all.
That's a fantastic book for anybody who's interested in the area. Yeah.
It's one of the best books on Hollywood, really. It's fantastic. So, Diller really emphasised hiring young people. This is a quote from him. He said, "I've always believed in bringing people into your organisation who are young and who are inexperienced in the job that you give them. And sometimes that works, and sometimes that doesn't work." He thought it was actually a failure to hire senior executives in senior levels. He always believed in just getting young, inexperienced people. He was very good, apparently. I read an interview with Dara Khosrowshahi, I'm not pronouncing that right, who went on to lead Expedia and is now at Uber. He was one of Diller's proteges. And he said Diller was just fantastic at reading people and at listening to them, so that he did suss them out and was able to put them into the right positions. And he did really put them into positions of huge responsibility, basically saying, sink or swim, there you go. You know, but it did work out, because under Diller's leadership, Paramount became like this massive commercial and critical success. Like some of the movies, Keith, under his watch was Saturday Night Fever, Grease, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like,
wow,
you're not just talking box office smashes. Like, they are defining films in pop culture, you know. And he also did critically acclaimed films like Ordinary People, won 4 Oscars. And in the interview with Reed Hoffman, he was saying his focus was always on storytelling. He said a strong narrative is the foundation of any great film. So he was prioritizing scripts over big names and stars, which went counter to what Hollywood has done and has always done. He was just like, get the right story and everything else will fall into place. And it wasn't just on movies. Paramount did TV shows, and the TV shows under his watch, Laverne and Shirley, which I'm not familiar with, that never crossed over here. Taxi, huge show. Cheers, another huge show. So, like, creatively and strategically, he was just hitting it out of the ballpark. Like, prior to Diller, Paramount's annual profits were 10 to 20 million, sometimes around 40 million, you know, on a good year. But under Diller, profits exceeded 100 million annually for nearly 10 years. And studios, they're working sort of boom and bust cycles. You know, they might have a good year, they might have a bad year. But he got consistent profitability. He had a saying, he said, if you find a vein, thickness. And this was it. This is the idea of, once you hit on a formula that works, keep at it, scale it up. And this is what he did with Paramount, and he was very, very good at it.
That's interesting, because you could see a thread there between the experience and Taxi. Taxi feels a little bit like Cheers, so maybe that's the idea of finding that stream or
this cast of characters. Yeah, very much so.
And just from the interviews, had you a sense of any particular movie or TV show that he seemed emotionally attached of or particularly proud of, or did he?
I think he was, from what I could gather, he was proud of all of them, because he just went with the script. He went with quality. It wasn't as if like he sort of went, okay, here's a script, now every movie has to follow this script. It wasn't like that. It wasn't formulaic like that. The formula was just in finding quality scripts and then get all the other pieces to go into place. But I think he was more proud of how he managed to sort of, as I said, tap into something and then scale it. What I got from the interviews, Keith, is one of the things I'd probably talk about a good bit or repeat a good bit in this, is that he loved getting into a business that he knew nothing about and learning. Yeah, he was saying in the Reed Hoffman interview, he said, a blank white sheet of paper is what I love. I like going in totally ignorant and then just learning from the ground up. And he said that he feels that's the only way you do. Because if you look at ABC, jumping from ABC to Paramount wasn't, like for like. I mean, sure, Paramount had the TV shows, but the movie business is totally different to the TV business.
I
In
wonder then
ways.
subconsciously, is that what was going on when he was hiring the younger people? He was having them follow that pattern where they were thrown into a deep end, into something they were deeply familiar with and given a lot of responsibility. Was he subconsciously sort of recreating the experience he had himself
Oh,
in the
I
young
would
people
say
he
so.
created?
I would say so. I would say it's a case of this is how I do it. So, I'm throwing you in and you learn from the bottom up and make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. And, it also, I suppose, when you're not going in there with experience, you don't have any of these preconceived conceptions as to how something should go. So it
Yeah,
allows you
yeah,
probably
yeah.
to be a bit more creative because you're not going, well, this is how this is done. You're kind of going, well, let's try it this way. And
Yeah, so undoing those entrenched sort of patterns that existed before he
yeah, and
got there.
biases as well. Yeah, definitely. Um, so, I mean, Jeffrey Katzenberg had this quote about him, about Diller. He said, he's in the All-Star League. The rest of us are like children at play compared to Barry. So Diller was this maestro in terms of how he managed Paramount. And they were really celebrated. I came across this New York Magazine cover which has Diller and Eisner on the front of it, and the headline is Hollywood's Hottest Stars. So they were really flying high for 10 years, but then it all came to an end in 1984 because in 1983, Charlie Bluedorn, he died suddenly at the age of 56. And in their place, they brought in an executive who'd been working at Gulf and Western. And Gulf and Western was this conglomerate that somehow owned Paramount. I didn't dig into it, but it's come across in the Redstone art episode we did as well. You're kind of going, what's this Gulf and Western company
Yeah.
and why does it own Paramount? But it was this huge conglomerate that owned Paramount. And Martin Davis had been this executive who had been working his way up Gulf and Western, and he took over from Bloodhorn. And this guy, we covered him briefly in the Redstone episode. He doesn't come across as a nice guy. He was named as by Fortune magazine as the toughest boss in America. He was known for his cold, cost-cutting focus, and he prioritized numbers over creativity. And of course, him and Diller just clashed straight away, and the feud apparently intensified because Diller wanted to launch a fourth TV channel to go against NBC, CBS and ABC. And Davis opposed it because Davis, by all accounts, didn't have a creative bone in his body. And apparently the final breaking point occurred when Davis allegedly demanded Diller fire Michael Eisner. Diller refused. Now, Davis has denied that he's done this, but whatever the truth about it, the relationship between Davis and Diller was really, really soured, and he quit. And not only did he quit, but it led to a mass exodus of executives from Paramount because nobody could work under Martin Davis, apparently. He just ostracized everyone. And David Geffen has this great line. I don't know if we used it in the Sumner Redstone episode, but it's a great line. He said, referring to Davis, he got rid of three of the most talented people in the world he inhabits: Diller, Eisner and Katzenberg. That right there was one of the most monumental screw-ups in the history of show business. These three gentlemen have created billions of dollars in value for their companies that could have gone to Paramount. And that was it. It was a double whammy for Paramount. Not only did Davis get rid of all these executives, but these executives then went to competing companies and made fortunes and built these competing companies into fierce competitors
And
at Paramount's expense.
didn't Geffen and Katzenberg end up founding
Yes,
DreamWorks together?
SKG with Spielberg.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, like, Davis screwed up big time there. But it was to the benefit of Disney, where Eisner and Katzenberg went, and to the benefit of Rupert Murdoch, because in 1984, when Diller left Paramount, Rupert Murdoch snapped him up and made him chairman of CEO and 20th Century Fox. And on the back of that, he backed Diller's proposal to start a fourth television network, which was a huge risky bet at the time. In fairness to Murdoch, people thought it couldn't be done because of the three channels at the time and such dominance. But Murdoch put in a lot of money. He spent $2.5 billion to purchase 6 major independent TV stations from this company called Metro Media, and these had presences in key cities all across the US, and they formed the backbone for Fox Broadcasting. Now, interestingly, there were some regulatory hurdles that Murdoch had to jump through. He had to become a US citizen as part of this agreement, and so in 1985 he did become a US citizen. He also had to sell the New York Post to do this, which he did. He later rebought it, and in 1986 the FCC approved the acquisition of Metro Media's channels and cleared the way for Fox Broadcasting to launch their own channel. Now, as I said, there was a huge amount of skepticism around this. And Diller, again, because he hadn't ever launched a channel before, and he had been involved in ABC on a programming level, but not on an operational level like this, he kind of took a different strategy altogether, a very unconventional one. He focused on a gradual rollout. So they launched in October 1986 with just a single late night program. So what I'm assuming happened here is that the 6 channels that they bought continued with their own programming, and Fox just launched then with one program, which was The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. And then gradually over the coming months, they launched a few primetime programs, initially airing just on weekend evenings, but nights were gradually added over the year. So it was a phased approach that was very, as they said, methodical, conservative, but hugely effective.
So they wanted to retain the audience that they had as well, and gradually...
Yes, and gradually just launch their own shows that were...
Reacclimatise them, that's very smart.
Yeah, and Diller picked the shows, knowing exactly what he wanted. He didn't just throw an awful lot of crap on air and say, there you go, guys. He was very clear on what he wanted, and he was given a lot of leeway. As he said in relation to Murdoch, I never initially, as we shall see, not in a few years' time, I never really felt like I worked for Murdoch. I made decisions as if I owned the place. And Murdoch at the time was very complimentary of Diller. He said he was a very conservative manager. He would arm wrestle movie producers for months. So again, a very tough negotiator. But Diller was clear on the strategy. He said, we were the 4th network, so we had to not be like the other 3. The only thing we should be is an alternative. So he had a very clear thing of whatever they were doing, we have to do the exact opposite. And you can see that in the programming. I mean, some of the programming he launched was Married with Children, Beverly Hills 90210, which, people look at that now and look at it as a standard teen drama, of which there are hundreds of them. But they were the first big teen drama. Now, I looked it up, they weren't the first TV teen drama. There was one in Canada called Degrassi Junior High, which came out 2 or 3 years earlier. But 90210 was the first mainstream one.
Huge.
It was massive. I remember it. Like, it was funny looking back at it, these 30-year-olds paying 15 or 16-year-olds.
And certainly my recollection is it had an influence in the fashion. A couple of years later, would it give birth to runner boots and dubs and all these sort of weird fashion.
It was
that
massive.
We're all probably victims of.
And Jason Priestley's hairstyle.
Haircut,
Luke Perry.
It brought sideburns back, I think.
Yeah, that was him as well, the leather jacket. And of course then, the big one was The Simpsons. For our listeners out there who mightn't be aware, it was Barry Diller who was responsible for bringing The Simpsons onto TV.
Yeah, I can remember The Simpsons being a small interlude in the middle of the Tracy Ullman show.
And it was very raw. Like
it was
the animation was really nothing like what it's like now. Yeah. But his reasoning for commissioning The Simpsons was very clear. At that time, The Cosby Show was the number 1 show at the time. It was shown on NBC. And he saw The Simpsons as being 100% the opposite of The Cosby Show. And of course, that was his whole strategy for Fox. Whatever the other networks are, we got to be the exact opposite. And The Simpsons were the exact opposite. And not only did he commission The Simpsons, Keith, he put it on at the same time that The Cosby Show ran on a Thursday night, which weakened NBC's dominance on Thursday night. So he really, he commissioned the right shows and then was very ruthless and strategic in going for the jugular, going right after the other networks. Like a very... You got it.
Surgical.
Yeah. Very good.
Where did Fox News come into this timeline? Or
I didn't look it up because I don't think Fox News was on Diller's watch at all. Fox News was later. But anyway, so things are going gangbusters for them. By 1990, Fox has established itself as a major TV network. So it's success for Diller. But as he said, in about 91, 92, he felt a shift in his role because Rupert Murdoch became more hands-on after moving to Los Angeles. And Diller recalled a board meeting where he felt like he was an unwanted voice chiming in. And he said he realised, my God, I really am an employee. So as Murdoch became more involved in the station, Diller probably realised, okay, he wasn't being given the autonomy that he had when Rupert Murdoch wasn't around, and he realised then, okay, I just work for this guy. And it wasn't just that led to him leaving Fox, although I'm sure that was one of the prime motivations. But he also said, after 18 years of reading scripts, I never wanted to see another one. He said I wanted to be independent, and he wanted to take risks with his own capital. And he also, and this comes across, I listened to interviews with him, I said the Reid Hoffman, but those other interviews I listened to, and he talked always about how he gets bored after he solves a problem. This is a great quote from him. He said, success isn't about staying on top of the game, it's about finding a new game to master. So he would always learn something, and he said once he started to master this, he'd get bored and he'd want to move on to different pastures, learn something else.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
always curious.
Always curious. And you'll see how curious he is when we look at now his next pivot, because what he gets into next left an awful lot of people scratching their heads. Because in 1992, he bought a 3% stake in QVC, which is a shopping channel. And he got the backing of John Malone, who also invested, of Liberty Media, I think it might have been called TCI back then, and also Brian Roberts of Comcast. These were two big cable operators, and back then in the 80s and 90s, the cable guys, these were the power brokers, these were the guys who made the news all the time, these were the superstars. And they invested in QVC, they said, because Diller was getting involved. As they said, it's a platform for Barry, so they just put their trust in Barry Diller. And Diller said his own interest in it came about because his close friend and future wife, Diane von Furstenberg, she had the Silk Assets collection. She was a fashion designer. And in one session on QVC, he saw that she sold $1.2 million worth of scarves in just 2 hours. And then over her 4 years with QVC, she sold over $40 million worth of product. So he saw this as, wow, what's going on here? And he said that on a visit to QVC studios, he had a real epiphany. And he said, I'd only known screens for narrative storytelling purposes. Here I saw a screen being used at this primitive convergence of telephones, televisions, and computers. And he said, this is going to change things. So
the early days of some sort of interactive commerce or e-commerce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is what I love about Diller. Like, Hollywood were sneering at him. Like, even his good friend, David Geffen, he said, I didn't think that QVC was good enough or big enough or important enough or classy enough for Barry. and so Hollywood were kind of going, what are you doing? This is like a home shopping channel. But Diller, he was just kind of thinking, this is great. This is so exciting. This is new. And that's what drove him. And he dismissed the criticism because, like, unlike his Hollywood peers, he just didn't care about status. He was just relishing the challenge of getting in here and growing this. And in fairness, Wall Street didn't care about what Hollywood thought either, because as soon as he took over QVC, the shares shot up because Wall Street thought, yeah, Diller's going to
this guy's up to something.
Yeah, this
guy
knows
and I
doing.
suppose the other thing to bear in mind for people who are interested in it, at this time there was two competing prevailing thoughts about how the internet might evolve. One was it would fork and be available in PCs, and the other one was it was going to be available in your living room via your television.
Yeah,
which was the vision that sort of Bill Gates had initially.
Yeah,
so I wonder.
This. Yeah. I wonder, was Diller kind of latching on to,
the
TV is going to be where people are going to.
Yeah.
And I think he did, because I think in the research I read, and we'll see when he gets into online stuff, they say that he missed the first wave of the internet, you know, when Amazon and all these got in a bit earlier than Diller, because maybe he was on the Bill Gates train, kind of thinking, no, the TV is where it's going to be.
Yeah,
all this.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting, because I think that's exactly what he saw with QVC. He saw, yeah, this interaction of TV, telephone, and there's this new thing called the internet coming on, and that's going to revolutionize TV. Not realizing, of course, that it wasn't going to revolutionize TV in a way; it was going to revolutionize computers. But anyway, his aim was to transform QVC into this interactive entertainment and merchandising platform, and he made some significant changes pretty quickly. He reduced the average price of merchandise that was selling from $75 to $48, catering to the channel's main customer segment. He increased the product range, so that he was selling jewelry and clothing mainly. He increased the range of products. He leveraged new technology, and even within 2 years of his time in there, and he was only there for 2 years, and we should see why now in a minute, he increased revenue from under 1 billion to 1.6 billion. So he really, like, organically he grew it really quickly by implementing all these changes. But of course, the real changes he was trying to implement was going to be strategically through acquisitions. And this is where we get into two of the biggest deals of the 80s. Diller was central to both of them, and both of them happened in 1984. So that must have been a very busy year for him. And the first deal he went after was Paramount. Now, I was thinking about this, Keith, and I was going, why did he go after Paramount? Strategically, I couldn't see how it would fit with QVC. It was a studio and QVC was a channel. And I can see, we'll go talk about the second deal, CBS, where I can definitely see the synergies there as TV channels. But I think with Paramount, it was an opportunistic one, because I think by 1993, Paramount was undervalued and was struggling under Davis, because as we said, Davis was not the kind of guy who should be leading any studio. And Davis was aware that Diller could be a potential adversary and could come after Paramount. So he preempted this by going to Sumner Redstone, and we covered this in the Redstone episode, but it's worth going through again, because this deal is just full of drama. And so himself and Redstone did a deal allowing Viacom to acquire Paramount for $8.2 billion, and Davis would stay on as CEO. So you think, okay, done and dusted. But then regulatory issues surfaced, because reports came out that Redstone had been buying Viacom shares just prior to the deal, which was against the law. It led to an investigation. Viacom shares fell, and the deal they were doing with Paramount was a share deal. So of course the deal with Paramount fell to 7.5 billion. And this is why I think it was just opportunistic. I think at this stage then Diller thought, okay, 7.5 billion is way undervaluing this deal. So he came out and he put in a bid for 9.5 billion to take over Paramount. And Redstone went ballistic at this, because him and Diller apparently had been friends, and he just lost the right completely. And he filed an antitrust suit against John Malone, who was Diller's main backer. And he also went to the US Senate Antitrust Committee. Now, an awful lot of people were saying Redstone's on to a loser here, but as we covered in the Redstone episode, Redstone was an extremely canny, cunning operator. He was also a Harvard law graduate, and he had a very, very sharp legal mind. And he was right in his tactic, because eventually Malone had to sell his 22% stake in QVC, and this weakened Diller's position. So you think Diller's on a losing streak here, but then Diller went with this tender offer. This is whereby he bypassed the Paramount board, put in an ad in the paper offering shareholders to directly buy the shares from them at $80. Redstone responded with his own tender offer, and this intensified a big bidding competition, and Diller raised his price again to $92 and gave the shareholders 3 weeks to comply or to agree to his offer. And this is where I think Redstone really comes into his own, because while all this is going on, Redstone has the wherewithal to go out and merge Viacom with Blockbuster, which was the biggest video chain of that time.
Wow.
And Blockbuster, again, younger listeners will go, Blockbuster video chains? Blockbuster was this huge video chain. And of course, because it was a video chain, it was cash rich. And so by merging Viacom with Blockbuster, Redstone was able to leverage Blockbuster's cash reserves. He increased his offer to $107 per share, putting the deal above $10 billion. And eventually in February 94, shareholders went with Redstone's deal. So this all played out in the public as well. It
Wow.
was a huge,
Bloody.
huge, yeah, and very public and very dramatic. But I think what I love about this, Keith, and what I love about Diller for this, is that he is so pragmatic. He came out with this legendary line when he lost the deal. He said, "They won, we lost, next." And what I really like about that is that for most people, they would have been like, oh, he lost out on this deal of a lifetime. But for Diller, this was just, I would say, one of the many pokers he had in the fire.
Yeah.
It was like, as David Geffen said, Barry always has a plan. This wasn't a do or die deal for Diller. This was one of the things, and if it worked out, brilliant. If it didn't, as he said, next. I've got other things to do. Move on. And I really like that about him. Now, and what I really like as well, though, is years later, on reflecting on that deal, he said, in the end, I didn't do it. He topped our last bid, and I didn't top that. The truth is, I should have done it, but I was chicken. So,
Oh.
yeah. So I love that as well. I love the fact that he's able to reflect and kind of say, you know what, I screwed up. I was a chicken there. So, you
He's
know, very-
rare
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah, you know.
He doesn't revise history and
No.
say it was a lucky near miss or something
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah,
type
or I
of-
was scuppered, or I was deceived, or he played, unfairly. It was all sort of, look, I chickened out. But anyway, so that was one deal in 94. At the start of 94, the deal went to Redstone. But then the other deal was this huge one with CBS. And I can definitely see the strategic benefits here. He sought to merge QVC with CBS in a $4.5 billion deal. And what would come out of that is QVC shareholders would get 46% of the merged entity, and Diller would be the leader of the group, of the merged group. And the deal was all but signed. Like, CBS were along for it, and on his way, on his jet to sign the deal with CBS at the 11th hour, Comcast, who were Diller's partners in QVC, they went for a $2.2 billion offer to buy out their remaining shares in QVC. So they just scuppered the whole deal just as Diller was about to sign it. They own 16%. They put in a big offer to buy the remaining 84%. Now, like, the drama around this was huge, and one of the quotes from the people involved said, Hollywood couldn't have written a script like this. All these cable broadcasting people are phenomenally greedy, phenomenally jealous, and filled with a lot of hate for their competitors. But when you dig into it, Comcast had very good reasons for scuppering the deal, very practical reasons. First of all, they wanted to protect their influence over QVC. They were a cable operator and QVC was a cable channel. And the deal would have reduced their stake from just under 16% to 4.9%. So they'd have very little stake in the new entity. CBS wasn't a cable channel. They also feared that QVS's focus would shift from cable to the network business, rightly so. And they also speculated on their concerns with Diller. They thought that Diller was using QVC as a springboard for himself.
A launching board. Yeah.
Now, there might be some truth in that. I suppose Diller was really just wanting to build a big business, but it went against their interests. So I can see why they scuppered the deal, but it was very dramatic and it was very last minute. And in fairness to Diller, again, very pragmatic. He said that the offer was not a complete surprise, saying, I don't consider it as an act of evil of any kind. He did say the timing took him by surprise, all right, though, that it happened at the last minute. But again, very pragmatic about it. Now, he did scramble to try and find higher bids for QVC so that he could buy out, or scupper the Roberts' deal, but it didn't happen in the end. And by the end of 1994, Comcast completed the buyout of QVC for $2.2 billion. And remember, when Diller took over QVC, it was worth $800 million. So within 2 years, he had increased the value of QVC to $2.2 billion. And Diller himself walked away from the deal with a $130 million payout. So,
Yeah.
he did okay.
He did okay, yeah.
He
Not a
did
bad
okay.
day's work.
Yeah. But again, these were two huge deals, and it shows Diller going up against people and huge organizations that were far, far bigger than him and really going toe to toe with them. And even though he lost out on both occasions, he put up a pretty fierce fight, and it didn't go against him in any way. If anything, the admiration within the media for Diller for even going up against these people was huge, you know. And I think that's what I liked about Diller whenever I read about him, was that, you know, he just went for it, and when it didn't work out, he just went, right, didn't work out, no problem, let's move on.
Next.
Next, and next again. So this is it.
And of course, his next venture is the big one, really.
Well, it is. It's what cemented his reputation over the last 25 years. And its beginnings, again, were very inauspicious, but people should have known this is Barry Diller. And they did. John Malone did, because John Malone was his backer in his next venture. And this is where he bought a company called Silver King Broadcasting, which had a small share in the Home Shopping Network, which was the big rival to QVC. And pretty quickly, with Malone's backing, they spent 1.3 billion to take over the Home Shopping Network. Then in 1998, they spent 4 billion to acquire Universal Studios TV assets. These were the USA Networks, the Sci-Fi Channel, and other channels. So they were building up this big television network. They called it USA Networks Inc. They built it up. So it looks like they spent maybe about 5.5-6 billion building it up, and then by 2002 they sold it for 11.7 billion, at least most of it, to Vivendi. Now,
Vivendi Universal.
Remember they were big for a while. Where have they gone now?
Wow.
Actually, that'll be an interesting story. I remember there was a French guy. They were a French company, weren't they?
Vivendi were, and then so was there co-CEOs? That always works out well.
Yeah. Well, Diller became CEO of what became Vivendi Universal Entertainment, and he stayed there until 2005 as the CEO, until eventually he sold the 5.4% stake that IAC had, and we'll get on to IAC now, for 3.4 billion. So he built up USA Networks TV assets with John Malone, sold it to Vivendi for 11.7 million, and then for an additional 3.5 billion a few years later. So obviously he made a lot of money for investors as a result of that. But while he was building up USA Networks, he was also starting to build up his presence in online businesses. And it's when he then offloaded the TV stations to Vivendi, he focused solely on these online interests. And these were what he said, he started colonizing offline businesses into online businesses. He was looking at businesses that he thought would be ideal for transition into the online business. And there are 3 businesses in particular we'll look at. They were the ticketed business, the travel business, and the dating business. And it's the dating business really is what Diller has made his name on, you know. But strangely, I didn't know that Diller was involved in Ticketmaster. That was a surprise to me.
No, I knew that. Yeah. I knew they were part of that.
Yeah, so in 1997, while he was building up, the TV stations and all that, he also invested in Ticketmaster. He bought 50% of Ticketmaster in 97 for 210 million. And then 5 years later, he bought the remaining 50% for 736 million. And the revenue in Ticketmaster when he took it over, just ballooned. It went from 743 million in 2003 to 1.24 billion by 2007. And then in 2008, he spun off Ticketmaster. And this is his MO with IAC. What he does is he invests in companies, and not only invests, they're not like VCs or passive investors. They take on the companies, then they nurture them, and then they spin them off.
Yeah.
And this is another aspect. I know I'm sounding like a real Diller fanboy, but everything he does I really like, because as he said, I don't like conglomerates. They're inefficient. As soon as it got to the stage where I thought it really needed the light of being independent, being on its own, that was a healthy thing. So he took a business, nurtured it, grew it to a certain stage, and rather than what an awful lot of other people, and most people would do, is, okay, now I've got my big business, I'm just going to sit on this and keep growing it. He would say, and it feeds into this idea that he gets bored with things once he masters this. He's goes, okay, it's at the stage now where it can look after itself. I've learnt this business inside out, spins it off, and that's it. And he did this over 10 times over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think he did it with Vimeo, the video hosting service as well, I think, which is a fantastic service, but started off tiny as sort of College Humor or something like that.
But again, that was a great example, Keith, of him just nurturing a business. They bought it, College Humor, and Vimeo was this video sharing that people were
Yeah.
using. And for years, Diller and IAC couldn't make a go of it. And I think they had it for about 8 years and they weren't making a go of it at all. But it just shows his long term view. He thought something will come of this. And then they hired this young, I think her name was Angeli Sud, was her name. She came in as a young marketing executive. And she said, an awful lot of small businesses are using Vimeo. So
Yeah.
she came up with this new strategy. Instead of trying to compete with YouTube, why don't we specialize and target small businesses who are using this? And even though it went against what Diller and the CEO of IAC were publicly saying the strategy with Vimeo would be, i.e. we're going to take on YouTube, they said, okay, we'll give this young person, Angeli Sud, a chance. They went with her strategy, and all of a sudden it went from this nothing business to a company that was worth over $1 billion within a few years, and they made her CEO. Like, it's again his ability to nurture a business, also his ability to take on young people and go with them if he thinks that, you know what, they're onto something here. I'm going to let them run with this. So a very interesting one as well. Of course, then there was Expedia. He bought that from Microsoft for 1.5 billion in 2001, right after 9/11, when everybody was saying this is the worst time to get involved in it. But he said, if there's life, there's travel. And he was proved right, because under Diller's leadership, it expanded. It acquired hotels.com, TripAdvisor, loads of other businesses, and he took on Dara I got to pronounce this right, Khosrow Shahi, who was a CFO in IAC at the time. He promoted him to CEO of Expedia, again without any real experience in that kind of sink or swim, and spun that company off in 2005. Spun Expedia off, and now of course Expedia is this huge country,
monster,
worth 24 billion. And what's interesting as well is Khosrow Shahi, who is now head of
Uber.
Uber now, over the last few months, have been talking about taking over Expedia. So there's been rumours about that. Yeah.
Wow.
Nothing's come of it, but it was mentioned, I think, in October 2024 he was considering it. But of course, what Diller and IAC have really become famous for, and this is where I first came across IAC, was their online dating business. And this started when Diller's son Alexander von Furstenberg told him that maybe online dating is something that they should look at. And so he said they bought this small company called Match.com. It was down in Texas. And then over the years, they just started adding to it. Again, feeding into Diller's mantra, when you find a vein, pick in it. And he just knew online dating was big. I remember, Keith, back then, those dating agencies at the start, they used to charge hefty amount. I don't know what they charge now, because I'm out of the game. I think most of them are probably for nothing. But I remember Match.com used to charge like $25 or $30 a month. So they were big earners.
What price you put on love?
Well, $25 a month back then. But and again, like with all his other businesses with IAC, he built it up into the Match Group. It went public in 2015. Overall, it's got 45 dating related businesses, and their total investment in Match Group was 1.6 billion. Match Group's valuation peaked in around 2019 at 20 billion, but I looked at it there recently and it's dropped again to under about 8 billion now. So I don't know what the reason for that is. I don't know.
And when they spin out, do they retain an ownership, or
they do, but I couldn't find out how much of ownership they retain, because in relation to Expedia, they were sluggish over the last few years, and Diller and a senior executive from IAC stepped in to take control for a while. So they do have some sort of ownership and some sort of control over it in terms of board level and all that, but I don't know exactly how much. But of course, it's not all plain sailing. When you get involved in loads of businesses, you're going to have some failures, and one that is notable that I remember from back then was Ask Jeeves. I think we mentioned it in one of the other episodes.
I was discussing it recently with somebody, and we were saying, what a great brand for an AI product. That could be. So it was kind of ahead of its time, I think. It was. So for people who don't know, it was a search engine, which had a very friendly sort of butler character, and the idea was it would sort of be an assistant for you, but the issue was the results were crap.
Yeah.
So it wasn't helping you. It was actually making work for you, really. And then, of course, Google just ate everybody's lunch in the world. Everybody's search engine. Disney had a search engine. But along came Google and wiped the
Yeah.
floor with everybody.
But you're right, Ask Jeeves. I remember the concept, and when it first came out, I thought, oh, this is brilliant. You just type in a question, you get an answer. But you go
Yeah.
to Ask Jeeves and you type in a question, and all you get was hundreds of crap links. It was
Yeah, yeah.
terrible.
So the questions were good, the answers were crap. Yeah.
I looked it up. Ask is now, it was rebranded as ask.com, and it's also part of IAC Search and Media. And if you go onto it, it's got a website with a few other links to a few other Q&A websites, and they say, oh, we've got, I don't know, a few million. I think they might say 20 or 30 million visitors, or they might even say 200 million visitors. I'm not too sure. Whatever they're saying anyway, Ask.com is not a success, and Ask Jeeves was a $1.85 billion failure for him. And then there was this other failure called Aereo. This is in 2012, where they invested 90 million in this live broadcast streaming company that cost $8 a month, and they used thousands of tiny antennas to capture individual signals. And they expanded into New York City and into other major markets. But the broadcasters sued them because the Aereo system bypassed retransmission fees, and so undermined their businesses. And they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found in favour of the major broadcasters, and Diller had to declare bankrupt in November 2014. So that was a big loss. Well, 90 million for IAC isn't huge compared to Ask Jeeves. I suppose it was very small. He's also invested in the Daily Beast. He set that up with Tina Brown. That hasn't been much of a success either.
No.
They merged it with Newsweek. I've never read the Daily Beast, so I'm not too
Oh, I
familiar
have,
with
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Is it good?
Very high quality journalism, yeah, really
Yeah.
good. But you could understand it's quite opinionated, so yeah, maybe even polarizing. So you could imagine it would have a limited financial success, but as an editorial piece, I think it's quite successful.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, they're the business failures, which you come to expect with somebody who's involved in that many things. In terms of scandals, there hasn't really been a whole lot involving Diller. There is his relationship with Scott Rudin, which was, the one time that kind of Diller got into trouble, and maybe rightly so in some way. I've got my own opinions of this, but the background to it is that Diller and Rudin have co-produced many. Scott Rudin, of course, is a famous film producer, and he's also a Broadway producer. And Diller has co-produced and financed some of his biggest Broadway plays, like To Kill a Mockingbird and Carousel, and also some of his movies like Uncut Gems, which is brilliant.
Really
Eighth
good.
Grade, I haven't seen. Lady Bird, brilliant. But in 2021, The Hollywood Reporter published allegations of verbal and physical abuse and gaslighting and fostering a toxic workplace by Rudin. I actually read those reports when they came out a few years ago, and Rudin does not come away from it very, very well. And there was a huge backlash, and Rudin stepped away from his projects. But Diller came out and publicly defended Rudin. And this is where he said he hadn't witnessed the alleged behaviour himself, and you're kind of thinking, come on, Barry, he's not going to throw staplers at his billionaire benefactor, which he had done to his employees. And but there is then Diller also criticised the cancel culture. Now, my view on this is that it's all about scale. And now, Rudin wasn't Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was, what he did was terrible, broke the law, throw him in jail, throw away the key, deserved it. Rudin, based on the Hollywood reports, is a dick. There's no denying it. He's a horrible boss, but the world is full of dicks, and I don't think every dick should be just, cast aside. I think there's the opportunity for Rudin to maybe take a look in the mirror and come out and kind of say, yeah, I've been a dick and I'm sorry. But, I don't believe cancel culture should apply to everyone equally in exactly the same way.
I think if there's ever going to be a quote extracted out of this podcast, it'll be, "Not every dick should be cast away." I think that's a fantastic line. But
So,
interesting. Yeah. But isn't it ironic in some respects that a thread that's coming through the story about Diller is how he looked after and supported and guided young talent.
Yes.
And probably it's those very people who bore the brunt of the
Yes.
abuse.
Yeah,
Isn't that's sort of ironic? So he was sort of defending the people or the person that was subjecting the type of people he would usually support and guide and mentor.
exactly. And it's totally antithesis to the way that Diller treated people
Yeah.
underneath him as well. So that's what's surprising. My own
Yes.
gut feeling on this is that him and Rudin have known each other and been very friendly for a very,
Right.
very long time.
And he's
So
a very loyal guy as
there's
well,
a
I
loyalty
guess.
there. But I think
Yeah.
even Diller, and he did say, if Rudin has been abusive like this, I do not support it in any way at all.
All right.
So there is that. But Diller did come under criticism for, defending Rudin. So there was that chapter as well. And there was also then the allegation of insider trading against Diller, David Geffen, and Alex von Furstenberg over the Activision takeover
Blizzard.
by Microsoft,
Yeah.
and he netted about 60 million. But he was cleared of all that. Now, he is very friendly with the CEO of Activision, but he said there was no insider trading and there was an investigation done, and he was cleared of it. So I suppose we're getting towards 2025. Quick look at where IAC is now. Again, loads of different companies that it's involved in. Dotdash Meredith, which is a big online digital and printing company with a market cap of 2.6 billion. They've got care.com. They have Angie Inc., which is this amalgamation of all these home services. Like, you remember handy.com, an
Oh,
Irish
yeah,
guy was
yeah,
one of the
yeah.
founders of. IAC bought that, and they bought these other companies like Handy, and they've merged it into this company now called Angie Inc.
So a bit like the gig economy as well.
Exactly. And again, that's what he does. He kind of takes this very long term view. They bought Handy. They didn't then just launch Handy on its own. They thought, okay, well, let's get Handy and let's get this and let's get that and let's put them all together into this home services company. They've also got a 20% stake in MGM Resorts, worth over 2.4 billion. They invested 250 million in Turo. It's this peer-to-peer car sharing platform. It actually came in the news recently.
Oh
because
yes, yeah.
Remember, I think it was the
the
Tesla.
Las Vegas.
Both those cars. I think the Tesla, the Tesla
Cybertruck.
truck that exploded, and that tragic incident of the guy who ploughed into the crowd recently as well. I think both those cars came from Turo, which isn't great for them. But he's invested 250 in that, or IAC have, and that's now worth just under $1 billion. So he's really focused on a kind of long-term growth over high risk. I like that strategy, And yeah, so IAC is doing very well. It's got revenues in 2023 of 4.3 billion. I haven't got the 2024 figures. And so overall, it's a great figure. From a start in 1995 of 250 million, it's grown from 250 million IAC to creating approximately 60 billion in equity value across its 10
Wow.
publicly traded companies. So it's done very, very well. Diller has had a great business record, and he has had some political skirmishes. He's not a fan of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is not a fan of his. They've both been publicly calling each other's names. He's called Trump a self-promoting huckster with a vein of meanness and nastiness, and Trump responded on Twitter calling him Little Barry Little Barry Diller, who lost a fortune on Newsweek and Daily Beast, only writes badly about me. He is a sad and pathetic figure. Lives lie or lives lie. I don't know what that means. But
God
I was
only
thinking,
knows.
Trump, don't call out Diller on his business record, because when you compare both records, I think Diller wins hand down. Although Trump is on top when it comes to bankruptcies, because Diller only has one bankruptcy, whereas Trump has 6 bankruptcies, so he's winning there.
Maybe they'll do a bit of crypto together or something.
Yeah,
down the
maybe.
road, yeah.
But he's been very critical. He's a Democrat, but he's very critical of. He's been critical of Obama's business policies. He's been critical of Elizabeth Warren. He was one of the first ones to withdraw support from Biden in his re-election campaign.
That was quite public as well, I
Very
think.
public as well. So he's not afraid of coming out and voicing his opinion. And on his personal life, and I normally wouldn't get into his personal life because I don't think it's anybody's business, but the fact is that his personal life was brought into the public domain very sneakily by Michael Eisner, and this will be covered in our Eisner story. Yeah. In 1997, Eisner was under pressure from Disney to name a successor. So he wrote a letter to the Disney board recommending Diller for the role. And this is 1997, remember. And this is Disney in 1997. And in the letter he wrote, the fact that he is a homosexual should have no weight, knowing right well that by saying that, he was scuppering Diller's chance of becoming the CEO of Disney. So this was brought out, actually. It was mentioned in James B. Stewart's book Disney Wars. That's where that was first mentioned. So it was a real low blow. And true to form, Diller has never addressed
He's never
speculation.
commented, has he?
No, and there's been speculation, he's gay, he's straight, he's bisexual, he's married to Diane von Furstenberg.
Yeah.
Really, he hasn't commented, and it's nobody's business what he is anyway. But he is so pragmatic. He apparently has held no grudge against Eisner, because Eisner interviewed him in 2005, well after this, when he was guest hosting for Charlie Rose on television. And not only that, Diller has made Eisner a director of IAC in 2011, where Eisner has remained a director.
What?
Yeah. So even after that, even Eisner did that sneaky letter saying, the fact that he's gay shouldn't really have any impact, knowing that this is the very reason why he put that line in, so that he wouldn't get the job.
Yeah.
Very, very sneaky, but Diller rises above us. So I suppose that's Diller in a nutshell. Pragmatic, classy, rises above us. It's why, as of all the people that we've covered to date, and I'm probably going to say of many of the people we cover in the future, other than the tiny little black mark for defending Scott Rudin, Diller for me is one of my favourite business people I've ever covered.
Yeah, he is. He's a very interesting guy, and what a series of sort of epoch defining and kind of career defining. He's driven a load of and been at the center of a load of very significant changes.
Yeah,
how many people can say that in one lifetime?
In one lifetime, and not only that, Keith, I would say from a personal level within himself, he's kept it exciting for himself. I think the reason why he's thrived all this time is because he just, not that he chops and changes direction all the time, he just takes on new challenges, masters them, takes on a company like Ticketmaster, gets to know it inside out, builds it up, passes it on, and then gets involved in something totally different.
Yeah.
And so that must be really invigorating, I think, to be able to lead a life like that, make loads of money while you're doing it. I gotta admire him, and I can see the reasoning behind it, and it's something that I think an awful lot of people who are in business would kind of go, yeah, that's actually far more fun than building a huge company and staying on top of it for 30 or 40 years, doing the same thing every day.
And I suppose in other respects his legacy is this rich seam of talent that he's nurtured and given rise to. This influential pool of people who'll go on to have huge success on their own merits, basically, as a result of him fostering their talent early.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the
almost
key
like
traits.
a dual sort of legacy there. Personal success and then hugely influential in the careers of others.
Yeah, you gotta admire it. So I love that story. Really
hard one to follow.
All right, see you
Cool.
soon.
Talk to you soon. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.